What would it mean if you and everyone else had access to the information of every other brain on this planet?
What if I told you that there already exists a mysterious technology that the CIA doesn't want you to know about? In fact, it's not me saying this, but a prestigious doctor who has not only experimented with this technology, but has also played a significant role in perfecting and studying it.
If I told you 200 years ago that I had a device I could put to your ear and you could hear what was going on the other side of the Atlantic, you would say that's crazy, but now we call it a telephone. If I told you 400 years ago that I had a device which allowed me to measure and represent your friend, and I could play it back long after he was dead and you could see that person, you would think it was magic. That's called filming. That's called a video. So think of it this way. Suppose there is a technology that allows us to have access to every bit of information that's available in the geomagnetic field from all of your brains. That's what he did.
Think about it. He couldn't be more right. The beauty of this technology is that it's accessible to almost anyone, if only they knew how to harness it. Yes, it might seem like magic, but remember, not so long ago, inventions like the telephone or the television would have seemed just as fantastical. Now, let's listen as he explains why all the three-letter agencies have desperately tried to keep this as hidden as possible. When it comes to the surface, it gets immediately banned, ridiculed, and labeled as a conspiracy theory.
First of all, knowledge is the ultimate power. And as you know, revolutions occur when about 50%, and this is historical, when about 50% of the population becomes educated, that's when you have revolutions, when they become literate. That's why people are often, and dictators are often against literacy or access to free information. The control of populations is based upon a few having discretionary information over the many. Call them governments sometimes, or administrations. Economic advantage derives from proprietary information. If everybody had equal access and knew what the other person was thinking, do you think there'd be rich people? Think there'd be poor people? And finally, the success of governments depends upon sequestered facts. Do you really think governments could have their power that they have right now if you knew everything they were doing? Of course not.
Okay, let's dive into the full talk. You're about to see just how insightful this doctor really is. He's a distinguished neuroscientist whose innovative research have earned him several prestigious awards in the field of neurological studies. His work, particularly on the brain's interaction with magnetic fields, has been pivotal, offering groundbreaking insights that challenge conventional scientific paradigms. Highly respected among his peers, he has published extensively, contributing over 100 influential papers that have advanced our understanding of cognitive functions and their implications. Alright, now let's dive in.
Are we all connected? And the answer is yes. We are all immersed in the Earth's magnetic field. The human species is about 7 billion conductive brains, all sharing this field. Think of 7 billion wires, all immersed in the Earth's magnetic field. This field contains enough energy to store the experience of every human being who has ever lived. It's an easy calculation. Just think about that. All the information of every human brain that's ever lived has the potential to be stored in the Earth's magnetic field with lots of energy left over. There's the Earth's magnetic field. You've seen it on many occasions. In fact, the strength of the magnetic field induced in every brain, right now you're being induced, put it this way, you are immersed in the Earth's magnetic field as penetrating through your brain, through your body. And in fact, the strength of the magnetic field induced in every brain by the Earth's magnetic field, when all brains are considered, is almost identical to the strength that each brain generates. Your brain generates in the order of about a picotesla, which is about a trillionth of a Tesla, much weaker than the Earth's magnetic field. But that's the operational intensity. But what does it mean? It means simply this: such convergence produces the conditions that allow global resonance and the possibility of a human hologram. That is, 7 billion brains, basically immersed in the Earth's magnetic field, all with similar intensities, the whole equal the sum, and the sum equal the individual equal the sum. That sets up the conditions for a hologram. Calculations suggest that the time required for an event in one human brain to diffuse into all other human brains on this planet would be about 10 minutes. And it would occur primarily during dreams or during altered states. In other words, you can actually calculate it. 7 billion brains is an easy calculation. One brain, something you're thinking about right now, how long would it take if we're all connected to diffuse to every other human brain on this planet? About 10 minutes. And optimally during dreaming. when the right hemisphere is dominant.
Are we all connected? According to Dr. Persinger, the answer is yes. Each of us are immersed in the Earth's magnetic field, which has the energy to store the experiences of every human who has ever lived. Right now, your brain is being influenced by this field, creating the conditions for a global resonance where our minds could potentially sync up. Dr. Persinger calculates that an event in one brain could spread to all others within about 10 minutes, especially during dreams. This idea was tested in the Maimonides dream studies, where people dreaming in one room described pictures someone else was looking at in another room. When geomagnetic activity was quiet, their dream content matched the pictures almost perfectly. So, are we influencing each other's dreams from a distance? And could we learn to access all information directly?
Classic example comes from an experimental study. Remember, the most important philosophy that human beings have ever developed has been science and the methodology of science. The most powerful and potent tool has been the experiment. This is an experimental kind of study in where individuals who are dreaming in one room and simply engaging in ordinary dreaming in another room, a person is looking at a picture, a target, a picture. And what we find, and this is the work done at the Maimonides Dream Hospital or Dream Studies, what we found is that when individuals are dreaming and someone in another room is looking at a picture, under certain nights, when you look at the dream content is exactly what the picture was, the other person was looking at. And it's so obvious that not only does the dreamer know, but if you gave the description of the dream and a series of different pictures and said, pair the dream content with all of these pictures, they'll pick the exact picture that was being concentrated upon. Notice that the black circles indicate that when the geomagnetic activity was quiet, very, very quiet, that's when the dream content of the dreamer corresponded with the details of the picture upon which the other person was concentrating. Well, think about that. Every time you sleep near someone, are they influencing your dreams? Or at a distance for that matter? Here's a more important question. Why don't these experiences occur more frequently? Or is your brain more like a television remote that is randomly changing channels and ever so often overlaps with the source? What would happen if a procedure was developed that allowed direct access to whole information, to all of it? Right? Suppose there was a technology. That's what we're talking about tonight.
As we proceed, he will delve deeper into a science that is simply mind-blowing. Yet, amidst these astonishing revelations, one truth stands out distinctly. Our brains, our very minds, equip us as individuals with all the necessary tools to achieve the extraordinary. Let's continue exploring these profound capabilities and what they mean for us as interconnected beings.
Can the ability to access information at a distance be trained? And the answer is yes, it is, and we've trained it. Okay, that's Ingo Swann. Was he always successful? Well, most of the time. However, the degree of accuracy was related to amount of 7 Hz activity over his right hemisphere. Again, the right hemisphere, the one involved with your dreaming. This is the same frequency that the entire Earth generates. His accuracy was less when there were geomagnetic storms and the Earth's magnetic field was disturbed. So if the magnetic field was disturbed, he lost the ability. When you lost the connection, you lost the ability. For example, there's an actual EEG. Back in the days, we only had 3 channels. Okay, notice the red arrows. Those are 7 Hertz. This is a unique pattern. You don't find it very often. And the number of these patterns were directly related to how accurate he was. So in other words, the more he showed that activity over the occipital right hemisphere, the more accurate he was in terms of the information at a distance. There's the ionosphere. And of course, generating between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere is a 7 Hertz pattern. And the more you get closer to that pattern, the more you seem to have access to everything around the Earth. For example, that 7 Hertz pattern not only has the same frequency as generated from the intrinsic aspect of your brain. Your brain has a natural frequency. Guess what it is? 7 Hertz. Based upon the fact that consciousness is recreated every 20 milliseconds, it's moving at about 4.5 meters per second. Just do a simple calculation of the circumference of your brain. It's about 7 Hertz. And the intensities of both the magnetic and the electrical components for both this and your brain are identical, capable of resonance. Here we have an example, of course, from the sun to the Earth. There's the Earth's magnetic field. And of course, when there's a magnetic storm, you can see that you get marked perturbation and the connections are lost. Now, we're not the only species like this. For example, fish very often communicate with electrical signals, magnetic signals they generate. Thunderstorms will interfere with that connection, like having massive noise, and their behaviors are distorted. So we're not the only species.
This frequency, which naturally aligns with the Earth's own geomagnetic rhythms, shows that our brains can tune tune into and resonate with the global magnetic field. This synchronization was less effective during geomagnetic disturbances. Mirroring effects observed in nature, such as how thunderstorms disrupt the electromagnetic communication among fish. This parallel underscores a universal principle. Connectivity in nature is governed by electromagnetic forces, whether in humans or marine life. As we push the boundaries of what's possible, remember the subtle yet powerful influence of these natural patterns. Up next, we will explore how even minimal interactions, like a simple flash of light, can synchronize separate human brains when they share the same magnetic information. This finding not only deepens our understanding of human connectivity, but also challenges us to rethink how we perceive influence and interaction at a distance.
But the effect extends experience. If both people separated by distance share the same configuration of magnetic field, a light flash, just a light flash, to one person affects the brain activity of the other sitting in the dark in another room. So what we found is that we can connect it to actual light, all right? The photon emission energy from the brain while a person is sitting in the dark is about 10,000 times less than the stars on a cloudy night, but we can measure it with photomultiplier tubes. However, it's 100 times more intense than the energy from the cosmic rays that pervade the universe. Now, I know you're thinking that this is really, really weak, but let me do an experiment real quick, okay? Effectively, you're listening to me right now, and the sounds you're hearing are in the order of about a millipascal in terms of pressure. That's what you're listening, about 40 to 50 decibels, a millipascal, and presumably you're listening to me. Right now, above you, there's over 100 kilopascals of pressure, 1 billion times more pressure on your body right now than the pressure associated with me talking with you and you listening. Can you hear the atmosphere? It's 1 billion times more. Of course you can't. It's not the intensity, it's the pattern. The pattern is the critical thing. So never underestimate the importance of the pattern. It's not the intensity. And furthermore, if we take something like this, like one of these nice little cinnamon, and I drop it, just like that. I dropped it this way. That's about a microjoule of energy. Now for you to see a light in the dark, that only takes about 10 to the minus 17th joules. That's a decimal point followed by 16 zeros and a 1, which means this is a microjoule, which means that energy from dropping that right now would be enough to light up every eye of every human being on this planet. The critical thing is the energy and the pattern that detects it. Never think bigness is important. So here's what happens. If, for example, we have one person in one room having a flashing light, another person in another room completely in the dark, and they only share the magnetic field, a special kind of configurational magnetic field that produces a synthetic consciousness, making both brains the same. When there is no flash in the other room, this person has theirs on the left, that's what's coming off the side of their head. If the person in the other room is seeing a flashing light, an ordinary, dull, flashing light, the person sitting in the dark, their brain also generates light because they're connected, even at a distance.
Let's pause for a moment and really think about what we've just uncovered. It's fascinating to see how a simple flash of light in one room can affect a brain sitting in complete darkness in another room. This isn't just a quirky lab experiment. It's a glimpse into the invisible threads that connect us. This opens up some wild possibilities, doesn't it? Our brains aren't just sitting silently in our skulls. They're actively engaging with the world through a mesh of geomagnetic fields. This kind of connection suggests that we're all part of a larger network, influenced by the same natural rhythms that pulse through the Earth. So, what's next? How can we use this insight? Let's hear Dr. Persinger.
Is there evidence of information transfer? We are now measuring photon emission from the human brain. That's how we think it's working. And you can see, if we took you, for example, and we ask you to sit down inside of a quiet room, and on the left hemisphere, the left side of the brain, right hemisphere, right side of the brain, notice that when the person is simply relaxing and just thinking about casual thoughts. On the other hand, if on the focus, you say, okay, now I want you to think of white light. Just think of white light. That's all you have to do. Notice the left hemisphere doesn't do anything. The right hemisphere, if you're relaxing, doesn't differ. The vertical axis is the amount of energy, and I can tell you what it is about 10 to the minus 11 watts per meter squared. But notice on the right hemisphere, when you ask a person to just think of white light, notice that under focus on the right hemisphere, there's almost a doubling of output. That's right. And now we know in neuroscience that it's very likely, Bocan and other people have actually shown this, that there's light emission from retina, that when you're actually thinking about white light, there's just not action potentials and neurons firing, there's actually photons being emitted within your brain, actual photons, and we can measure them. The minute you have photons, you have access to almost everything. Now, when there are photons involved, the phenomenon of entanglement becomes real. This means that what happens to one person is reflected in another, regardless of space or time. Here's a animation of what we're talking about. That's entanglement. In other words, entanglement means that effectively, the minute you have two people connected, photons here and photons here, we really don't know right now when that photon is flashing in the other room, is it the same photon that shows up in the other person's brain instantaneously, or there's simply entanglement. But if you have entanglement, you understand what that means. That means you have information at a distance. You change something here, you change something here instantaneous. Already physicists are doing this. They call it teleportation because they're a bit more dramatic. But in actual fact, they've already done it up to over 100 kilometers. Change the polarity on one, the other one changes instantaneously. That's the first stage to having information from everywhere.
Dr. Persinger introduces us to the phenomena of photon emissions from the human brain and quantum entanglement. It might sound like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, but it's grounded in solid science. Photons, the basic units of light and all other forms of electromagnetic radiation, are emitted by our brains. This emission is subtle, yet measurable with sophisticated equipment. What's truly revolutionary about Dr. Persinger's findings is how these emissions suggest potential entanglement between human brains. Quantum entanglement, a principle where particles become interconnected, and the state of one can instantly influence the state of another, no matter the distance, is well documented in physics. Dr. Persinger's research suggests that similar phenomena could occur at the biological level. This brings us to consider the implications of such entanglement in human communication and consciousness. If our brains are capable of producing patterns that mirror quantum behavior, could this be the basis for a new form of communication? Could this be why sometimes we think of someone just as they call us? Dr. Persinger's work pushes us to consider these possibilities, challenging our understanding of human connection.
Now, if one has the technology and access the appropriate patterns shared by other brains, information can be accessed. We can amplify, concentrate, and control what has been happening only occasionally for centuries. Now think about it. Like watching lightning. We did it for thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years as a species, and then we mastered electricity. Look at the difference. We watched birds fly, wondering what it would be like. We never did have wings, we never developed them, but now we can fly, we call it an airplane. If you can imagine it, it can be done. And that's why, because the brain is matter. It's based upon the physical principles of the universe. And if you have that capacity to imagine it, that means the potential is there for it to be done, because our brains are reflective of the essential aspects of the matter of this universe. Now, Sean Haribant's a classic example of extraction of information. This is the man who knows your memory. We were the first to demonstrate that when he is engaging in reading another person's memory, it's not all hocus pocus. What really happens, a part of his brain that's been different from the time he was born shows an increase in activity as measured by single photon emission computerized tomography. Very specific to the right parietal lobe. Is there another homogeneous field to which all of us are exposed? There are the communication systems of the web, internet, and the massive electromagnetic matrix that it creates. I'm just giving you one. There's others, you know. Let's take a good look at it. That's sort of a diagram of it. You can see that effectively right now communication systems are so pervasive that we all are immersed in this background that we call communication systems. You know, interesting thing, at one time we used to have radar sent out and reflected back in order to see things at a distance. Now the electromagnetic density of all the communication systems are so great they generate a shadow. We don't even have to generate radar emission anymore. We're living within the shadow, quite literally, of a massive electromagnetic field generated by communication systems, which means we're immersed, all of us, in a homogeneous secondary field called the communication system, called the modern technology. And much of it is pulsed, very much within the range of the brain, the human brain.
Imagine if we could harness brain patterns as we once harnessed electricity or mastered flight. Dr. Persinger's work suggests it's possible. By tapping into shared brain patterns, we could fundamentally change how we communicate and understand each other. Like the early aviators or the pioneers of electricity, we are on the brink of a new frontier. Take the example of Sean Harriman, whose brain activity during memory retrieval was clearly visible through sophisticated imaging techniques. This shows us tangible evidence of the brain's potential. Moreover, our constant immersion in the internet and communication networks, our modern electromagnetic matrix, mirrors this natural potential. These systems shape our environment, just as surely as natural forces once did, challenging us to adapt and evolve.
I want you to think about something, and that's the following. Just remember Alexander Graham Bell, the first time he generated a signal across the room. It was scratchy. He could barely hear it. But the point is, from that beginning of just a bit of information, now we have one of the most sophisticated technologies in the history of Western civilization. We have the telephone communication system. You've got to start somewhere, and then you perfect the technology. Now, has there been evidence that such connections occur? Yes, for decades, verified cases indicate that some people's sudden experiences about a crisis to or death of a loved one occurs on days when geomagnetic activity is quietest. The experiences usually occur during a dream state. Let me give you an example. On the evening of the 5th January, I was visiting, this is from a middle-aged woman. This is one of many cases. These kinds of cases have been recorded certainly since the 1870s. Massive booklets containing this information. On the evening of the 5th of January, I was visiting in my kitchen with some friends. Suddenly, I felt my face flush and I felt ill. In a matter of minutes, I was out cold. My friends carried me to the living room and placed a cold cloth on my head. They said I opened my eyes and stared for 15 minutes. When I came to, it was exactly 10:30 p.m. That night, I was ill and vomited several times. I kept crying and thinking about my sister. Every time I thought about our mother, I felt depressed. The next morning at 7 a.m., my mother called. She was crying and extremely upset. She told me that my sister, who lived 200 miles away, had died suddenly the night before at exactly 10:30 p.m. Now, that's a classic one. Now, when does it take place? Well, usually it takes place when the geomagnetic activity is less intense. This is an example of a geomagnetic pattern recorded right here in our laboratory at Narration University. You can see the perturbations. This is a very active kind of night, a geomagnetically active kind of period. You're looking at various components here. On the other hand, on quiet nights, which is the next one, you can see the difference. In other words, when it's quiet, when it's geomagnetically quiet, the connections between all 7 billion brains have greater possibility. When there's more perturbation, it's like having more noise in the system. Very weak effects, but very strong and emotionally significant impact.
We've all heard tales akin to premonitions, those eerie, inexplicable feelings where someone senses something before it actually happens. Until now, these phenomena haven't been thoroughly explained. Yet, today we're beginning to uncover the scientific underpinnings. Notably, individuals such as Ingo Swann, Pat Price, and Russell Targ, who have all claimed to work on remote viewing projects for entities like the CIA, bring credibility and intrigue to these discussions. These concepts might seem overwhelming, and it's often easier to dismiss them than to confront their implications. However, what Dr. Michael Persinger is suggesting is not that we are too late to understand, but perhaps that we've been too quick to dismiss these abilities. He posits that under conditions of low geomagnetic activity, our brains might act like antennas, capable of receiving signals and information from afar, offering a plausible scientific basis for how someone could experience a premonition or distant event.
One such person is Ingo Swann, who helped develop the phenomenon of remote viewing. Ingo Swann is the individual, and this is Ingo. Ingo Swann was involved with the development of this remote viewing for the Central Intelligence Agency for the United States many years ago. The idea is, can you access information at a distance? As opposed to saying it can't happen, suppose we say it does happen. Well, let me show it to you. He learned to identify experiences that originated primarily in his right hemisphere as pure images and experiences. Here are some examples while he was sitting in a closed chamber in our laboratory here at Narration University and asked to draw what experimenters were seeing based upon random selection of targets. So here's what we did. We had experimenters walk by a hallway, and we would randomly give them an area somewhere within 15 minutes of Narration University. They had 15 minutes to get there. They would simply look at the target. These were randomly selected targets. Let me give you just a few. This is where you begin drawing. Curved building, tall vegetation, angular, natural, breeze, cool, convex, motion of some kind, a sense of vista, a smokestack in the distance, arena, trees, sense of a conveyor, smell slightly bitter, car, more than one, slight slope, grotto, mine, entrance to, round and large. Don't forget, he's sitting in a chamber now, and we're measuring his EEG, and we've enhanced its capacity with the technology I'm going to show you in just a few minutes. Distant stack, road, now 2 major cuts near a closure, depression, circular, something goes in, motion or movement, conveyance motion, cars. And what was the target? You all know what it was. The target was the experimenters had gone to see Science North. There's what he drew. That's what it looks like. He had no idea what was going on. These were randomly selected targets. I'm showing the ones that are most conspicuous. There are many others. Here's a bird's eye view. This is all published in scientific journals, incidentally, and you can access them by simply Googling it on the web.
The most striking thing about everything we've explored so far is the idea that human brains, through shared magnetic fields, can become synchronized, even when separated by distance. It's almost like a kind of mental entanglement, where the experiences of one person can directly affect the mind of another. And Dr. Persinger's work shows that when two people share the same magnetic configuration, the accuracy of their shared information increases dramatically. Think about what this means. If we can tap into this connection, it could completely reshape how we understand communication, relationships, and even consciousness itself. And yet, it's still early, much like the first scratchy phone call made by Alexander Graham Bell. There's so much potential here, but it requires us to keep our minds open to possibilities that seem too vast or improbable.
The most intense phenomena were these: when another person in another room is looking at a target and the same time as the second person is sharing the same magnetic field, the accuracy becomes greater. So in other words, if you have one person here, you generate a condition that produces the same kind of magnetic field that influences the brain at the consciousness recreation pattern. What you'll find, if whatever that person's looking at, the other person can actually draw accurately. Well, let me show you. By producing a device whereby the same complex magnetic fields are shared by two people separated at a distance. When that happens, the two brains become one. Okay? So here we have the actual technology. You can see one chamber. That's what we call the octopus. It's basically 8 solenoids that produce a accelerating configuration, a second derivative magnetic field. There's what it looks like. There's the person in one room. All right, with the octopus, there's a person in the other. There's some examples. The actual target picture that one person is looking at is on the right hand. You've seen that as the bridge down here in Sudbury. What the other person's drawing, sitting in a separate room, and you can see the actual drawing, and you can actually see the letters or the words up there, and we've amplified them for you. Motion, bright long vertical lines, wormhole, crowd, flower, explosion, passing stuff moving through. The essential aspects of that hidden target have been extracted and now are being shared by the two different people who share the same magnetic field. Their brains, both those brains are now effectively one. What would happen if you had access to all information from every other human brain through a new technology that is now being developed? And the answer is no more secrets. Thank you.